All right. Well, it's 7 a.m. here in Las Vegas time, and we're surprising some of our listeners on doing an early morning chat. But this is such an important chat to have, and we've got a wonderful guest here. We've got Helen Guillaume, who has developed and worked on Wild AI. And it's a platform that we'll go into a bit more, but it really is focused on the female athlete. At least that's how it was started, and I think it's even becoming more broad than that. And it's the female athlete across the lifespan. And so this is going to be so exciting to talk with her about what she's developed and her team going on there. And we've got a couple of other people on this call. So we'll also first say good morning, or is it afternoon for you, Helen?
It's afternoon for me. So yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, good afternoon and good morning, Ted.
Morning. Yeah, this is awesome. Good way to start the week. We had a little bit of a short week here because we have our Thanksgiving holiday coming up. So a good way to start the week. So good morning to you.
And we can also say good morning to our guest co-host or tri-host, I guess, if that's where we go, Marissa Shahani, who is a PhD student at UNLV doing her work on low energy availability. And this is an important topic for athletes in general, but very much so for female athletes. So this is our team, and we are so excited to talk with you, Helen, about your work. And if you would, maybe just give us sort of the big picture perspective of Wild AI, how you came about developing that, and where you are right now with the program.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited. We've been speaking now for a while, so I'm very excited to be here on the podcast. So my background, I like my professional background, I studied mathematics and financial risk. I was a quant in a hedge fund and management consultant in AI, so very much on the data science side. But in parallel of that, I've always been an athlete. I was a semi-pro rugby player, and like many of us going into the professional world, I then got into more individual sports such as triathlon. My first actually individual sport was ultramarathon running, and I was always a swimmer. So just I did a bike and I became a triathlete, which I loved. My longest distance was a half Ironman, which I loved. It was hard enough to be challenging, but easy enough to still have a social life. So I thought it was a great distance, and obviously like all the gear, the technicity around it, fascinating for someone who was a data scientist. But being a woman in sports, it always basically sucked to be a girl and then a woman in sports. It's as hard as I would try, I would always be just a woman, less fast, less strong, less interesting than men, so not portrayed in medias. And yeah, it's just quite a gloom prospect for a woman. So I was thinking, is that the only way I can understand my body, which is basically the suboptimal body, whereas the holy grail is the male? And I really try to understand, is there another story for myself? And that is what put me on the path to create World AI, which is there a way to understand that my body is incredible and really powerful, and that instead of thinking that my body is moody and bitchy and complicated, there is actually a purpose of having these hormonal changes. And also something that many people might relate to, as a woman competing often with men or training with men, I would seem that my performance was quite varying. So for instance, I would climb a hill cycling with guys and I would climb really well, and the next week I would be out of breath, whereas they would climb the same way. So I could see that there was definitely a difference, but at that time we never heard the sentence cycle thinking. So that put me on the path, and I untapped this Pandora box, which is the female body functioning depending on the hormonal fluctuations. So that's what do we do at Well AI, which is understanding the female body. How does it function? What does it need? We translate that research into our app, and we take data from wearables, manual input, aggregate these two together. It gives us a readiness score, which you might be familiar if you're using Aura or Garmin, all these wearables. But this is a female readiness score, and based on that, person has an adaptive recommendations on supplements, nutrition, pre and post exercise, training, and recovery. So that's our app, and we have a coach dashboard where all the coaches can see all the women, really upskill themselves on what is a woman 101, whether she menstruates, uses birth control, is in perimenopause or menopause, and then provide these recommendations to the women and really differentiate themselves to other coaches because they know how the female body functions.
Awesome. Can you just go a little bit more in depth on the scientific research and evidence that you use that's kind of formed the basis of Wild AI and I guess its approach to training and nutrition?
Yeah, so what we've done is analyzing, there is little research, but there is some research. So analyze the white papers, are they good papers? Are they well peer reviewed? And so we can have a better understanding of what we deem as what we believe is true. And we translated that research into our app. We work with Dr. Stacy Sims, who is the world reference in our field. She's the author of Roar and Next Level. Roar is how to train the menstrual cycle. Next Level is how to train as a woman in perimenopause and menopause. And so we've a highly scientific background. And we currently also run research with universities. So PhD students use our app to be able to collect data sets, test assumptions, and really advance research for women. So we started with white paper analysis. We currently continue doing research. And the next step, which is really exciting, is that with our own data sets, we are able to also test new assumptions and advance the research.
Yeah, that was actually kind of where I was going is I know that you do that, right? And this has been a problem for a long time with female athletes and the lack of research. Even in the last 10 years, the research has changed. Sometimes it seems it's night and day in the last 10 years. So with that being said, we want to make this really applicable to our listeners. So can you just give us an example of how a female athlete would use Wild AI? Just from, once again, I'm logging in, I'm a female athlete. What do I expect that I'm going to get?
Yeah, and also to give some numbers on what you were saying on the research. So in generally speaking, 80% of the medical research is done on males. And when it comes to sport, it's crazy. 6% only of research in sports focus on women. And the rest, we actually do not differentiate if a man or woman, but usually we only use men. So we really understand very little. And then to your question, how do we use the app? So you open the app, you can download it on the App Store, Wild AI. And then you open it. If you have a wearable, you can sync with your wearable. If you have Garmin, Fitbit, Aura, Apple Health, Training Peaks, you can connect. So, and then on a daily basis, what happens is you open the app, you have check-ins, so you can check in manually. It synchronizes with your wearable. So for instance, I have Aura. It gets my sleep data, my resting heart rate variability. On top of that, I do manual check-ins, how I feel, do I have pains, how eager I am to train, my behavior, like did I drink alcohol yesterday, my nutritional values and hydration, my sex drive. So we aggregate these data sets and it gives a readiness score. So 97, 25, anything from hopefully 1, not 0, to 100. And based on these index, we are able to provide you insights. What might happen to you today, because you are day 12 of your menstrual cycle over a cycle that is 27 days, for instance, and you might be in your ovulation window. We are not a fertility app, but ovulation is really interesting and important for female athletes. So it might be the time where my resting heart rate is the lowest, I feel the most eager to exercise, my sex drive is the highest, and it's a time where I can really push on high intensity workouts. And so here I would see like my manual data, my automatic data, and where I am in my cycle, then provide the app, the content behind the algorithms, the knowledge to what can I provide to that woman. So she is ovulating, so we provide her recommendations on heat high intensity workouts, and then her body at the time of the cycle really needs increased fats and carbs. So this is what we would recommend in terms of nutrition. And then she has negative symptoms, we can provide recommendations on how to palliate those negative symptoms. And day after day, the recommendations go according to that. And what is interesting is that she's sticking, if she's done it, if she's followed that recommendation, she ticks it in the app, it sends a feedback loop into the algorithm, and so we learn if it works for that woman or not. And on the flip side, if she has a coach, the coach can steal this data. Obviously, by opt-in, she can share her data sets, and the coach can really learn together with the woman how does the female body function. It's very optimized for the coach. So it's not just raw data that's very hard to understand. It's actually more like an alert dashboard. So you can see the women who are exposed to the highest risks. So Marissa, to your point, low energy availability. So things that would be, for instance, she doesn't have a period for a few months in a row. She hasn't been feeling really strong, or like early signs that we can detect. And as a coach, you can intervene, being there really as a human and helping the athletes going back into track to be a healthy and powerful athlete.
Awesome. I have one more question. I'll let Marissa jump in. So is it predictive? So as a coach, if let's say I set up somebody's training plan for a week, can it predict what the athletes might be like that week?
Yes, absolutely. So you have this view of what might happen, and as women, we also have this view, which is basically is the mirror. So you see the same thing as a coach or as an athlete. What might happen to me, which is great because you can then plan accordingly, but also it might not be true for you. So we always use these words. Some research says X and X, and as a woman, what is really interesting is that until now I had no visibility, so I had no idea. And here I can just really ask myself these questions: is this true for me? And then what can I do with it? And so yes, you do see what might happen to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Marissa, go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you. So I, first of all, love the fact that you have the coaches able to access all the information as well from the athletes. And I'm curious on like the other end of the spectrum from kind of what you were talking about earlier, does it, and you spoke to this a little bit, but does it like red flag anything that could be potentially concerning for a coach so that they're then aware that maybe this athlete's having issues or they have missed their period for 2 months in a row? Or is that something that the coach has to be more aware of and able to like elucidate themselves from the information that they have available in that?
Yeah, so I used to be in trading, so I was creating these pricers, these platforms for traders to see the alerts. So my job was to highlight alerts so that the traders could take decisions. And it's exactly the same here for the coaches. We are highlighting these alerts, so they don't have to go in the athlete's data every single day. What we do really well is we are data driven and we run algorithms really well, and we can see what is unusual. So in the data sets or in what she's tracking, we can see what is not okay versus her patterns or versus what we deem as a normal body variation during that time of the menstrual cycle. And so you actually have, like, on the dashboard on the top right corner, this place where you have all the alerts. So you have the red alerts, you should really be looking at it. So for instance, she hasn't had a period for top 2+ months. So this is like high alert, or like she has recorded like really bad hydration for a couple of days. Like how can we alert that? Or some extreme pain for the past 2 days. So how can we, as a coach, be aware of that and then go and speak to her, understand what are her situations. And then you have mid alerts, which are things that are a little bit less worrying, but worth noticing and having a chat with the athletes. And then you have all the ones that are green, which are going quite well, but you still have the data sets if you want to delve into it.
It's very cool. I'm also curious about the, I guess, balance between how the menstrual cycle versus just training will inevitably affect fatigue on a female athlete, and how you're able, or how the app's able to kind of say, oh, you should take it easier today because of this physiological reason, or we're just fatigued from a workout, but that's not a reason not to push ourselves again today to kind of maximize the training response that we're getting.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The noise and the reason why someone might feel tired or overworked can come from many places. External stresses, which are unrelated to exercise, internal stresses related to the exercise themselves, or like muscle fatigue. So we try to be able to understand what has led to a certain place. And you might be just before your periods at a time where you have heightened premenstrual symptoms. You might be in addition to that stressed, and you might have drank alcohol and slept really badly. So we try through the algorithm, the more data we have, the more we can understand the situation of the woman. But it might also be the case that we don't have all this data that for a few days, which is also okay, because naturally, like, women are going in and out of being very keen on the data sets. So we try to be there as much as possible, but also just like we are a companion. But that is why the coach has a really important role, because the human, we basically, we optimize a lot of the things that are difficult and tedious to do as humans, but then the coach has such an important role as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. My last question is kind of on that topic that you were just talking about, but from the perspective of the consumer as a female athlete, when you're looking at all of the data that's going into the app and that is feeding into it to give these recommendations and the readiness score and all of that, is there a difference across the different wearables? Because I know there's a huge, not push, but uptick in the number of female athletes switching to like the Aura ring because it's better at tracking cycles, because it can get your basal body temperature and things like that Garmin doesn't necessarily do. So do you see a difference? Is one better than the other if you were interested in getting the app, or is it kind of the same across the board in terms of the data that you're getting?
Yeah, so for us, we see that different use cases. So you can use the app without having a wearable. The more data, the more refined the recommendations will be, but you can definitely use the app without a wearable. And then actually the two wearables you mentioned are the two wearables I typically use. I also have an Amazfit, but Aura and Garmin for me are two very different use cases. My Aura, I wear it on a daily basis, on a nightly basis. At night, it's a very good night wearable, definitely better than a watch because it's more seamless. It also, like, the data and the highlights that it has are very sleep oriented, which for me are very good. And as you added, it does have the body basal temperature, which is interesting just to see, to estimate when I'm going to be ovulating, for instance, or if I'm pregnant, which Garmin or watches typically don't have. So I think like Aura, it's a very good wellness wearable. But when I am exercising, and especially in triathlon, I do want to have a screen where I see my speeds, and I want to have a specific screen for each of my activities. So for my swim, I just want to see my time per laps, and then for my running, I want to see my kilometers per hours. Or so I do want to have a specific screen, and definitely not using my phone. So I think like the use cases are quite different. And if I'm going into like ultra long events, like ultra marathons, 10+ hours, or in triathlon, if you're doing Ironman, you also want to have an extremely good wearable that would probably not be an Apple Watch. And so I think the use cases are very different for the use that the woman is going to have.
That's a good point. Across like a recreational athlete compared to an elite athlete, the data that you want to be getting would be different.
And what we typically recommend is a watch plus a Aura.
Okay.
Yeah. So Garmin or Amazfit plus Aura.
Okay, I'll jump back in here. So one of the areas that I'm interested in is in mental health. And so how does Wild AI adapt its recommendation if, for example, we know an athlete is dealing with different levels of stress or anxiety or depression, or is that part of it?
So there is definitely a tracking element. So the mental health and stress related to mental health and physical stress in a wearable will be reflected the same way, as in the resting heart rate might be elevated, but it cannot understand if it comes from a mental stress or a physical stress, the sports. But by the addition of the tracking, the manual tracking, we might understand that it comes from a mental stress. So for us, if the body or the person isn't in an ideal situation, the recommendations will probably be lower, as in like less high intensity workout, etc. But this is where actually the human element is really important, because to understand like the refinement, because sometimes you are in a negative spiral, but actually what probably will make you good is to go out and do some exercise, but probably not to the most extremes. So This is like the time where understanding that, because also the mental health impact on the actual raw data sets might be a little bit worse resting heart rate, and the person might or might not be true like to the manual tracking feeling this extreme level. So that's where, like, for us, we are really good as a complement to a human. So it's like, in chess, machine plus human like can beat machine plus human, but machine cannot beat human. So for us, we see the same ways. We really, really need the human element to be able to be these we can highlight the things, as I was saying earlier to Marissa. So you would have these alerts that things are a little bit unusual, but then we will, like, hopefully the coach can jump in and play an important role there. For women who don't have a coach, they would see it. Yeah.
Awesome. No, I think it's great because, you know, everyone is dealing with this. Every athlete is their own person and they have their own individual challenges, right? And I think your app, from what my understanding, does a good job of trying to help the individual. And so we talked about mental health, but I guess, can you go maybe a little bit deeper? For example, if somebody had their own physical health issues or physiologic health issues, like, I don't know, I'll just give you an example. I'm sure you're going to be able to give me way more. Let's say they had a thyroid autoimmune disease, right? So very specific disease that does affect their training and actually plays into their reproductive health and their hormonal imbalances. Is this something that you've seen athletes use, and to what level?
We have a lot of women who have specific use cases and specific history, but we're not able to cater to that yet.
Okay. All right. I think that there's something there to be able,
for sure.
to be able to help specific and, you know, N of one issues. So I wonder if they're doing it on their own. I assume they are.
Yeah, we have a lot of women who have, like, for instance, hysterectomies, or like specific use cases where they might not have normal hormonal fluctuations, as is like defined by the norm is a broad word, but like, so we have a lot of women who reach out to us saying, like, I have this specific use case, can you cater to us? And it's definitely in a roadmap. Things that are right now in a roadmap is polycystic syndrome, endometriosis, prepartum, so things that disproportionately impact women. And then down the line, ideally, you know, in an amazing world, we'd be able to cater everyone. But yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
So I love this discussion, and I'm curious. Well, one, what you said in terms of the number of females involved in research being so low, that is amazing. That is the case for a long period of time. But as you and others like Dr. Stacy Sims have really promoted involving females as subjects within studies, we're starting to see sort of a change in the dial there. That being said, with the work that you're doing, I'm wondering, what is the biggest surprise that you've noticed as you've looked deeper at the research and the application of that research to helping athletes compete in endurance events?
Yeah, there's a known pattern now, which is this kind of bell curve of the menstrual cycle. So first day of the menstrual cycle is day one of the periods. We are, for 40 years more or less, from the first periods to the last, for 40 years more or less, we have 100% of the time menstrual cycle. Day one is the periods, and then we lead up to ovulation, when typically we peak, low resting heart rate, feeling really strong, motivated to exercise, and then it goes down, and we are around the premenstrual symptoms where we want to regenerate, be more inwards. And this is a very traditional curve that a lot of research now says is the typical curve. What is really interesting is we found the opposite pattern for some women, which is literally the opposite. Women actually have the worst resting heart readiness score at ovulation time. So we were wondering, why is that? Because there isn't much research, but all the research tend to say that ovulation is a peak time. And it's because for some women, ovulation is a very hard time. It's a shift of hormones, and they react very strongly to that. They have ovulation pain. And so what is really interesting is that women is a fascinating world that we really, now with the computing power, we can really, there's no excuse we don't understand women. But also it's really interesting because it's so personalized, because every cycle is different, every woman is different. And so we really have to continuously question our own data sets and our own knowledge to be able to serve women better. And also the other thing which is incredible is, as much as for men, we have these personas, and one persona will be the same for many, many years. For women, I might be 42 years old, have endometriosis, postpartum, and using a contraceptive, and this is not a different persona, it's the exact same person. And so we overlay all these need of knowledge behind. And so it's fascinating when you come from a data science perspective, is fascinating because yeah, it's infinite in terms of like the knowledge we have to bring them.
No, totally. The lifespan and things evolve, and people have to evolve. So maybe a pragmatic point. What would you say to someone premenopausal in terms of selecting races based upon cycle?
The incredible thing as well that we've learned is that as much as training with the cycle actually can really increase your strength, your body, and your performance. And I'll give you an analogy. When we all have a daily cycle. So I wake up in the morning, I'm pumped. Towards the evening, I'm tired, I go to bed. You go to Japan, you're going to be jet lagged, and because you are counter cycle. As a woman, if I've been always operating counter cycle. I've never been listening to my body because I've been operating all the time like a man. Like basically we are like Ferraris, men are like tractors. They behave all the time the same way. We are like Ferraris or like athletes. We peak and then we need to recover, which actually is a blessing. But if we understand that, we can basically operate better and better over time. If occasionally I like do a race when it's not my peak time, it actually is okay. It's like if you're going suddenly out and you're partying until 5 a.m., at 3 a.m., you're not going to be suddenly tired because you're just at a time where you have high adrenaline and you're really performing. But because you have prepared the right way, your body is better. And there's actually no research that says for one menstrual cycle, at day one, at the middle, or the relation, or at the end, she's performing better or worse. There is research that says if you are following the methodology over time, you are becoming stronger, which is good news because it means you can actually train and have your races all the time, basically.
Awesome.
Love it. No.
So I want to just once again go back to the app and to the what it can do. So obviously a lot of the athletes and coaches deal with other people as well. So they might have a sports dietitian or nutrition person, a sports doctor. Does the app have the ability to basically have an output or like a summary that I could give to like a physician that's not familiar with the app, that it could actually be maybe practical application or practical information for someone that's not familiar with the app that the athlete could bring to that person?
Yeah, so the woman always has the capacity to download all of her data sets and delete all her data, always. But also on the coach dashboard, she can have a coach, but a nutritionist, anyone she works with can have access to that platform as well. So this is really the purpose of that dashboard, is that they can the professionals can see where all the women are, all the data sets, etc. And so the women can definitely have that because it's made for that.
Awesome. All right, Marissa, go ahead.
All right, thank you. Helen, I got two more questions really quick. So the first one is, we know that, I guess a little background to it, but we know that at certain points in the menstrual cycle, women can be more at risk for certain injuries, particularly like tendon and ligament injuries. So whereas we used to think like ACL injuries were more due to the difference in biomechanics between men and women, now we're seeing the association in the menstrual cycle in certain phases. And so does the app take that like kind of injury risk into account, in addition, layered on top of like just the fatigue and overall stress on the body and things like that?
Yes, absolutely. So when we ovulate, our body gets ready to get pregnant every single month. And so our ligaments like open up, loosen up as if I was getting pregnant to prepare for that potential pregnancy. And that actually is really interesting because ACL injury is highly correlated with ovulation time, but it doesn't mean we cannot exercise at that time. It just means that we have to exercise, taking into consideration that our muscles have to take the role of a weakened or loosened ACL. And just incorporating that entirely in the female training actually means that you can lower drastically the ACL injuries. And so in the app, there is, you can see with graphs, the increased injury risks and the different exposure to risks that you might encounter, and definitely the recommendations around that. And what is also interesting, again, on the coach dashboard, is that coaches can try to understand how can they train optimally women to reduce all these risks because they're so prevalent in women.
That's good. I like that you kind of bring the coaches into that too, and that they have the specific recommendations in addition to just the athletes kind of having that on there. dashboard. And along the same lines of like specific cases and kind of going back to what Ted was saying earlier, talking about potentially an athlete with like a thyroid issue. I saw that you cater, that you have like menarche starting around age 12, and then the age that someone would be on an oral contraceptive, and that you are able to work with so many different contraceptive methods. And then there's kind of perimenopause and menopause. I'm curious if there's a specific integration in the app for pregnancy or women who get pregnant and want to keep training, because that's something that I've seen is really lacking, or that there's not. Obviously, it's very individual, but if we're taking an individual's data, I feel like you're probably the best equipped to be able to provide that information.
Our real sweet spot of age is 30s to late 40s. So a lot of our women are getting pregnant. But pregnancy is a job by itself, and our research right now isn't good enough to cover pregnancy. And so we definitely want to cover it. In the last 12 months in my team, we got 3 babies. So we definitely want to cover prepartum, postpartum, and then pregnancies. Unfortunately, right now, because it's a job by itself, also pregnancy really enters the realm of medical. And it's really unfortunate that the medical world does not cover female and pregnancies. So, I was 9 months pregnant and surfing, and all the doctors I've spoken to, they told me you should not be surfing. And so there is no knowledge, and when you are active women, it's very frustrating. So hopefully we can fill that void. But yeah, right now there is no period option, because we had so many women who were frustrated by the fact that they couldn't continue using the app while being pregnant. So that's the low case scenario right now. And an important point is that we are an app for women who are active, and we're not a fertility app. So we'd never ever say that women can use the app to use it as a contraceptive, for sure not. But also, yeah, we're not a fertility app.
That makes sense. Thank you. It's a very individual thing too. So I feel like it would be difficult, and it's difficult to get research out on pregnant women and exercise in the first place because of ethical and medical reasons. So it's probably going to take a little while in order to get all the information that you guys need in order to actually make that a part of the apps.
Yeah, absolutely. But what we are going to do is that we are going to use real use cases, because in that case, because it's so complicated to have you're in the research world, but having a researcher who has a sign-ups from active women who are pregnant, who will then exercise because they are part of a research group. So what we want to do is to have our women continue using the app, have the option to opt in a research, which they do a lot. They love participating in research, and then just follow their habits. So like with the app tracking, we can follow exactly like the current usage. We follow their exercises, how they feel, etc. And instead of having, and then like having a medical entity checking what has happened, but this is the best we will be able to do early on, which is bringing the story and the data and the journey of women who have been through pregnancies, with all the caveats and the massive, alerts, like this is not a medical advice, etc., but this is what women have done.
That makes sense. Thank you. I appreciate the insight onto all of that and how you're, hoping to further integrate that into the app, but I will pass it back along.
So kind of going along, it's a similar thing, and we're dealing with individual, once again, health issues. And I understand that this is not like a medical app, right? You're not trying to be a sports medicine physician or a physician, but in your experience with athletes that have had, like, let's say, menstrual health complications like PCOS and endometriosis, have you noticed with the people that are using it that they're actually able to, I don't know, make them better? Like, so those aren't so impactful?
So women who have PCOS and endometriosis use the app, but we do not cater for them specifically, as in our recommendations to lower symptoms are not catered for women who have PCOS and endometriosis, which again is unfortunate, but our research right now is not covering that. Having said that, what is interesting is that women who have endometriosis take an average 7 years to be diagnosed, but here they can have in the app like basically in their monthly reports, we have a menstrual cycle report. So instead of having like any app, a monthly report, you have it at the end of your menstrual cycle. So, 7th of October, 7th of November, which is unlike all the other apps in the market, because this is how the female body functions. And armed with that, she can go to her professional and say, these are my patterns. I have these pains exactly at that point. It seems like maybe it's correlating with the increase of my lining. So is it endometriosis because the growth of the cells seem to be correlating with the growth of the lining as well? So question mark. So she can be better armed to self-diagnose herself. Again, we're not a medical product, but a lot of women actually are using us to be able to just understand their symptoms, and then month after month understand and see their correlation with where she is a cycle, and then talk to someone who actually has the capacities to digest these data sets.
I think that's fabulous, because it really is, that's really missing. And you're right. It's that 7 year. That's probably, believe it or not, worse in the United States, at least in my experience with dealing with people. So many of the physicians here that at least the athletes that I've worked with, they don't even, it's not even on their differential diagnosis for like 5 years, it seems like.
It's crazy. Yeah. And it's really painful. So it's crazy that we are just shattered and ignored.
Yeah, perfect.
And the women who exercise, because there are more stresses, more inflammations, and we're putting our bodies in under more constraints, typically have also heightened symptoms. So it's even more prevalent for women who are active.
I think that, for people that are out there that are coaching, if you have an athlete that has, endometriosis, or you're suspecting this, or is understanding that it is really painful, and it is really difficult to train through. And if you can get some insight from this app, I think that'd be very, very helpful.
Yeah. And the other thing for the coaches, what is amazing is having a way to have these conversations with the athletes, because in the morning of a race, we all talk about having been to the toilets. It's like very crucial to see if you when you poop. But then we would never talk about things that are female specific. Whereas if we have the tools to communicate these things, it's amazing. Women love to talk about it because they've never had a platform to talk about it, including with their gynecologist or their doctors, because they all tell them it's normal. You're just a woman. It's like, it's actually normal that you have pains. And so we are taught to completely ignore these pains, because since we're 13 years old, and we tell the sports coach like, oh, it hurts me, and they're like, not that bad, run with the other kids around the courtyard. And so that's how the messaging we've been told as women. And so it's amazing as a coach to be able to have this incredible role in women's life, because they might never had someone to talk about that.
Great, thank you.
Well, along that same line of thought and discussion, which is incredibly insightful, and thank you for doing this. As women enter the menopause and postmenopausal phase, I imagine that there's a tendency for them to not participate in endurance exercise, especially. I don't know if there's data on that, but I would think that would be a period that there's changes that they just aren't interested in continuing with the exercise. What would you say to the menopausal or postmenopausal woman to continue to encourage them to be involved with endurance exercise? What are some of the sort of take-home points that they can try to expect in terms of changes, or how to adjust their training?
Yeah. So quick note for anyone out there on the vocabulary. So perimenopause is the time of 1 to 10 years where we have hormonal fluctuation. We start having symptoms, which might be from memory loss, brain fog, hot flushes, stop losing weight the same way. So this is like 1 to 10 years. Menopause is 12 months of birthday of no period, and postmenopausal is 24 months birthday of no periods. So for these, and perimenopause might start in the 30s. And so many women actually don't necessarily know that. And also we only typically know this one symptom, which is hot flushes, but there's a lot of symptoms. And so what is amazing for women who are entering this phase, because as much as we might not all have kids, we will all have menopause. So for us to enter this phase, it's an incredible phase of our lives, because it's we have a total new body again, once again, and to get to learn how this body functions. But also there are many things that you can do to actually reduce the negative symptoms. In our app, we specifically cater these women and their symptoms. So first of all is trying to understand these symptoms, because they might, at the very beginning, they might think it's completely isolated events, but then they might actually start to understand it is perimenopause. So already able to put that name is great. And then we can really prepare for aging. And that is really what we advocate, which is aging is amazing. Like it means we're alive. So, but how can we prepare better? Because instead of like burying our heads and just ignoring the fact that we're aging, like aging well and aging healthily and having a very strong body is what we can prepare for. And for women, it's particularly important to do weight training, which in the gym is typically a male sport. But for us, it's very important because with menopause, our bone density goes down. And that's why our grandma falls in the bathtub and breaks her hips, is because our bone density goes down drastically. But we can go against that. So we can really do strength training. And then generally speaking, staying active is amazing for any health related issues, going from cardiovascular disease to the bone density as well. So staying active, community obviously is really good for longevity.
That's great, and I imagine getting women into using your app, even at any stage, is important. But certainly, as you talk about, as you change and you have a new body, you've got to continue to adjust. Thank you.
Yeah, and the other thing which is incredible is that we have not talked about that at all until now. So women, when they start having knowledge on it, they become really strong advocates about this, sharing this knowledge to other women. So they can play an incredibly important role for the women around them.
So go ahead,
Sorry.
Marissa.
I was just going to say, I'm curious on that note, talking about the menopausal state. I see a lot of women who aren't necessarily doing endurance exercise, but they're overdoing the cardio because, like you mentioned, you change how you lose weight. Women hold on to more weight in certain areas of their body and they're very unhappy with it. So from the nutritional aspect, because I know in addition to all of the physical activity, the app gives nutrition recommendations. What does that look like as it changes? Or does that also respond individually to the data, or more so just to stage of life and cycle?
Definitely replies to the stage of life. So specifically for the stage of life, what kind of nutrition you should be going around that. And like we advocate a strong, fit and performant body. So we never say skinny and is great. We always say like this is the fit and strong body is really important. We also do not advocate for overweight, but this middle ground is really important. But understanding how to get there is the ideal, and this is what the recommendations in the app would help the women go through. And I know for your research, low energy availability, like the most extreme is redness, losing the period, bone density going down, etc. But a lot of women, regardless of the athletic level, whether they're pros or they're just enthusiastic women who are exercising, they very often would go into a state that is undernourished because our nutritional values are just not met. So we would eat, like salads with barely any fats, and it's just not enough for our bodies. So our bodies are made to be endurant. Women are extremely endurant. This is why we have these fats. And if we are going into starvation mode, so like I stop eating and I exercise more, our bodies go the opposite that they do for men. It means that we actually accumulate and store body fats. And so it's really important for women throughout their life as a menstrual cycle, but also during the perimenopausal and menopausal times, to understand that how their body function, because then they can go and get the results they want and be fit.
Yeah, it can be very hard to get women to understand how their metabolism is responding to those kinds of things too, and how, like you said, with increasing weight training for women, that's really important, and how building muscle is going to help you to get where you want to be in terms of weight goals and strength goals and all of those things. And it can be a difficult conversation because in the past it's been so much more just weight or being skinny or carrying less weight while you're running.
Yeah.
Okay, I have one last question, then we're going to let you go because we know we got a hard stop coming up. But what are the barriers that you're seeing as far as barriers to entry for someone using your app?
So we were made from a world of being highly scientific and researchy. So the app still looks like it's like quite advanced for people who are knowledgeable about research or professional athletes. The reality is that it does cater for women who are just exercising a few times a week, enthusiastic. So the barrier to entry, I think, when women see our app and our positioning, is that it does look a little bit too pro. So I think that's a feedback we have a lot, and we are working on making it still obviously like very always research based, but more accessible. And also athletes, even if they're professionals, they're not necessarily researchers. So, you know, we use words that are still like a little bit too technical. So we are working on making it more accessible, but that's on us. But we still have many women using it. And then in terms of what they should have, they don't need to have a wearable. They can not have a wearable at all. They can just download the app and start using it, cracking on. If they have a wearable, it's great. We also have many discounts with our favorite wearables. But yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, Helen, thank you so much for your time and meeting with us. This is our second time we've chatted. I just really appreciate you and appreciate you spending the time and what you're doing for female athletes. I think that it's amazing, especially, you know, given your background. You're a stock trader and a finance person, and you've dove into this world, and you really are making a difference. And I just want to, you know, personally thank you.
Thank you. I was a quant in the hedge fund, but yeah, in the trading world. But yeah, thanks for all the things that you're doing as well, and thanks for the podcast as well, and the research you're doing, Marisa.
Great. Well, thank you so much, and thanks everyone for listening.